marching in.
Yeah.
You're like saying, look at me, I know what I'm doing. That's when reality usually comes and like smacks you over the head. It shows you don't know what the hell you're doing at all.
Yeah, well, Palantir was really started because terrorism is awful. We want to prevent terrorism. But we also want to prevent the consequence of terrorism, which is the reaction that happens in society, the kind of knee-jerk desire to trade off privacy and civil liberties in order to get more security that you may find yourself living in a world you didn't even want to be in anyways. And so there are lots of reasons in terms of how much it destroys the very underlying fabric of society to work on these problems. And so we started a company that set off with that mission to go do that. And I think this is the beginning of history in some sense. We realized, yes, history will keep going, the continuation of history. That was really hard because at that period of time, how do you start a company working with the government? When we started going around the valley, and we had a pedigree, like the founders of Palantir also started PayPal and had been successful. All of the venture capitalists were like, you guys seem like really smart people. It would be a shame to waste your life trying to build something for government. It's never going to work. Can't you build a trinket you'll sell to a bank instead? We'd love to give you a check for that. So structurally, there was really no support in the valley for these sorts of things. Principally, I'd say even at that time for financial reasons. Over time, it also became for political reasons. And then when you go to DC, they couldn't understand why aren't you just selling me labor? Why are you trying to build software? What's this sort of investment? Why do I need outsiders involved? We do software too. What's this valley thing? So there was a huge rift between these two worlds, and so there was a lot of kind of wandering, feeling like you have no home in either place, wandering through the desert, trying to get these things to work. I always point out that I think it's pretty ironic that at that point in time. The intel community is more open and accessible than the Defense Department, and largely to the great credit of In-Q-Tel, which was started in 1999.
Gilman was on the podcast a few weeks ago, so
great.
Good lead in.
We were so naive when we got started. We didn't even know In-Q-Tel. We actually went to a VC who was trying to find a polite way to let us down, and they said, if In-Q-Tel invests in you, we might consider it. And we played it off yeah, of course, we'll go talk to them. And so In-Q-Tel was interested in what we're doing. The other firm never did invest, as I kind of foreshadowed here. But that ended up being massively valuable. And I think it really gets to another point, which is the capital markets in the U.S. are the best in the world. The issue for us was not capital. It was really validation from a credible party and access to that world. That you need a wormhole to kind of transport you from modern Silicon Valley to that defense or intelligence world. And In-Q-Tel provided that. They provided access to the customers, funding for the pilots, clearances to get going, all these kind of non-market barriers that prevent innovators from going and solving these problems. If we have to fight between now and let's say 2025, you're not fielding any new exquisite capability. Mm-hmm. The only thing that can be fielded between now and then is software. And we need to start thinking about software as a weapon system. We need to start thinking about the ideal commanders are going to be commanders who are, in some sense, product managers. They understand that software is malleable, and I, as the commander, can say, change these things, make it work this way. My software engineers are part of my fighting force. This is a whole new concept of fighting, and I see this play out in the field, where there are some commanders who get this deeply and they have profoundly different effects than other commanders who view this sort of technical thing as someone else's job. I just use the capability that's given to me. And I think a lot of this comes down to the deep desire to drive outcomes through process. Look, if we have process, we're going to institutionalize these outcomes. We're going to be able to figure it out instead of just a fundamental acceptance and recognition that there's only content. Yeah. Process is going to drive us all towards mediocrity. Yeah, you're right. You may not have this thing blow up on you the way that you would if you didn't have process, but you're not going to have the exceptional outcome either. And there's a great Lost interview with Steve Jobs where he talks about this, where, he's like, companies get confused. They're trying to replicate their first success, and they say, well, what was the process we used to drive that first success? And they screw it up. And part of this, it comes back to the founders and the difficult part. He's like, look, there's just content, and content people are a pain in the butt, I think is his quote. They're a pain in the butt to manage. Yeah. And I think my boss would say that's true of me, and I certainly feel like the content people under me are, they're charming. And I think one of the things I often say is that, I think there's a quote from Airbnb that culture eats strategy for breakfast. And I think maybe even before culture, talent spotting, it eats everything for breakfast. You mentioned Joe earlier. Right?
Yeah.
Like the first 50 employees at Palantir were completely talent spotted by him. And some people are good. It's like I don't know how to describe why someone might be good at this, how this, but what you can tell is someone is extraordinarily talented, and we need to reorganize our efforts around this person in these areas. And so how do we kind of aspire to create institutions that are artist colonies, not factories?
Yeah.
The kind of default mode is, hey, we're going to industrialize. Hey, I'm going to give you a career ladder, which is highly inauthentic.
Anti-ownership, too, once again, your framework.
Yeah. Yeah, and let's celebrate the artist. Like, you don't get Dali to paint better by telling him he should paint more like Monet. And individual craft and pride in that and a cultivation of ownership. I think one of the things about very smart people is they can be taught almost nothing, but they can learn. And so how do we reimagine our institutions as places that they're continuously learning? And for that to really happen, you have to give them ownership.
And, we started Palantir because it was clear there was a giant gap between what was possible going on in defense and what they had. And so the number one thing was, let's make sure we make America safe. Let's deter the enemies. Let's make sure we get the bad guys. But then the number two thing is, a lot of VCs are coming in now. They're helping. It's great. People are really working on this space. We're getting the top talent in America to engage. Now that you have a lot of the best and brightest helping, I was trying to remind some people of their responsibilities, because what I noticed is a lot of people, when you do get engaged in this space, it has a tendency to influence you to be more militaristic, a little more aggressive about these things. And it's really important. Our policy in our country is about deterring the bad guys, not about engaging in more wars. And so we have to all remember that our duty is towards peace. It's not our job to decide if war or peace, but our job is to build things to encourage peace. That's what we're trying to do. When you're building a new defense company, it's really hard. It's really hard. These things take a long time. You're basically building two companies at once that both have to be A+, because, if you're not A+ as a startup, you're dead. So you have to build something. When you build something for defense, you can't just be 20% better, 30% better. The government would rather go with the prime. They'd rather go with the thing they know. You have to be like 10 times better. You have to be so good that you're shaming them not to work with you. And so that's the product tech side. Then, once you're so good that you're shaming them not to work with you, you got to actually do that. You actually have to build a team in DC. You have to work with Congress. You have to work with the Pentagon. You got to have enough patience and staying power to do an A+ game on the Hill and be around long enough so you could finally win some of these games, which take a few years. And so most people who haven't been in this space, it is frustrating. It is much slower than a lot of other areas. And to have to be A+ at both of those things, that's rough. Well, if you want to build in this space, first of all, you need to find a place where, like I said, you could be 10 times better. That's really hard. So where is there something they're missing for some reason, and you have to, good if you understand the reason. Usually it's because there's certain barriers people have put up structurally, or they're just taking the entirely wrong approach. So I think having that giant gap, and then the thing you have to do in this space is you actually have to be interested in Congress and in the Pentagon and in the game and how it works, as well as being interested in the technology side. And there's usually one or the other. Usually most companies in space are only really small companies, because it's people are really good at the game on the Hill, but they actually have no idea how technology works. None of those guys have any idea how the top Silicon Valley technology companies work. Or you get the engineers who are really know how the top Silicon Valley technology company works. Maybe they've come from being top talents at Stripe or Facebook or whatever, but then they're really not interested in the Hill, because give me a break. That's really boring stuff, and it's totally different. And so, if there's a playbook here, the playbook is being A+ at both of these, and I very rarely see it. What I found most of the time is that people who are running things in government aren't always the ones who know how to navigate government, ironically, because it's a very different thing. There are exceptions. So, for example, when we were building Palantir, George Tenet was very useful. He had a lot of really good strategic advice. He really figured out how all these institutions had worked after running the CIA. Most guys who ran the CIA were not good at that. In fact, 9 out of 10 advisors from DC, is they actually didn't know how to navigate DC. So I think the real thing you want is you want people who've succeeded before. This is the key thing. You see this in all of Silicon Valley. The most successful companies come from places where they've done it. So, for example, if you want to start Anduril, what you did is you took 3 of the best guys from Palantir who'd learned in the trenches, who'd really figured out how it worked, who had ideas about how to do it even better, and then you took America's Iron Man, Palmer Luckey. You combine those guys, like that's perfect.
Add a dash of revenge too. And get that make.
Well, if we're gonna do a second company, we need a chip on our shoulder. All of us serial entrepreneurs are slightly crazy. That's just how it is. Yeah. Like, so you do need a little bit of a dialectic. You need more of like the philosopher diplomat, which was Karp, I guess. Is even though people, Karp and I both have our quirks, but you need people like him and around him who could really think about navigating institutions and with the patience to do it. And find this even with some of the people here because they spent so much time in DC. Like, oh, you can't do it that way. That's not possible. Just not what we do. And the frontier is more like, what's the right result? Let's figure out how to get there. We're going to get there. And things that are on the frontier are functional because they have to be functional because otherwise they break and you don't have any backup. And so, we really need more of America to feel like a frontier again, to keep growing, to keep expanding. And I think that bold spirit is what's going to keep us a great country. So let's keep pushing for it.